In this video, we're going to be getting started with geometry nodes in 5 minutes. So let's get started. To access geometry nodes, select the Geometry Nodes workspace. Here you'll have the 3D viewport, the spreadsheet, the node editor, and the modifiers tab. Click on the new button here to add a new geometry nodes setup to your existing object. You'll notice that geometry nodes acts as a modifier, and you'll be able to edit how this modifier functions by swapping in and out nodes. The group input represents the original geometry. The group output represents the final result after the modifier has taken effect on the model. You can rename your geometry nodes modifier here. So if we just open this out, we can rename the modifier first and foremost, but we can also rename the node tree. For example, I can rename it as tree here, and it's renamed here in the node editor. We can replace our group input if we want with another mesh primitive by simply detaching the group input and then holding Shift and pressing A to bring up the add menu. Now I'm going to search for cylinder. We can see it's under mesh primitives, so we're going to go cylinder, place it in, and connect the mesh output to the group output. This now changes the cube's geometry to that of a cylinder, but we have the ability to procedurally edit many of these parameters within our node tree. You can do this with pretty much any node that you add into the node editor. These inputs can actually be connected to the group input node. So if you want this functionality within the modifier itself, you can just click and drag to add them to the group input, and then they will be added to the geometry nodes modifier. If I do the same with the radius, you can see we're now able to manipulate the depth and radius from the properties panel instead of the node tree. So once you're finished creating your geometry node tree, you can continue to use the modifier itself somewhere like the layout workspace. So here I can return to the modifiers tab and continue to manipulate based on the functions that I have exposed. Returning to the geometry nodes tree, there are many different types of nodes that we can add. Follow through with each of these menus and you'll find a plethora of different nodes that allow you to do all sorts of different things. For example, we have a material option here where we can set our material. This will set the material for the geometry generated by this modifier. So we can go in and create a new material. Let's call this a red material. Then in the viewport, go to the material preview shading method, come down to where it says material in the node tree and choose red. This will assign the red material to the geometry that is generated from the cylinder node. You'll notice that there are different colors for the various sockets on the cylinder and set material nodes. Typically speaking, you'll want to connect to the appropriate colored sockets. For example, we can set the material to be assigned only to the top and bottom of our cylinder if we want. We can click and drag the top output with the selection. This will add the material only to the top of our cylinder. Alternatively, we could place it on the bottom. So it would then be positioned at the bottom of the cylinder, or we can position it on the geometry on the side of the cylinder instead. Finally, there are ways in which we can better organize our setups. For example, I can select both of these nodes and I can join them together in a single frame by holding down Control and pressing J. Alternatively, if I just hit Control C to undo that, I can use Control and G on my keyboard, and this will group them into their own singular master node. From here, I would click on this button here to return to the parent node tree. You can see that we have two exposed parameters. We would simply go in to our node tree and again just expose the parameters that we want to use for this specific node. Then come back out and all of those parameters would be made available. Finally, we can rename things like our node tree by just clicking on the name of the tree and then renaming it. So in this case, I'll rename it as cylinder, and that will give the new label to our node group. But that wraps up this very brief introduction to using geometry nodes, which is just intended as a starting point to get you going with tools that are somewhat familiar. If you enjoyed this video and would like to learn more about Blender, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell icon for more Blender tutorials in the future.